Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining me this morning. We are going to cover how to enter data into the CCH2 portal this morning. I'm recording this webinar so you can access it in the future. So feel free to share the link once I will put it on the website, and you can share the website link with people. Joining us today is Ed Gilbert, who is our Symbiota developer. Thank you, Ed, for being able to join us, and he'll be able to answer questions, hopefully, that that I might not be able to answer. So, all right. So, what we're going to work on today is how to find our records to transcribe, first of all. What is kind of in the specimen label and where that specimen label information is going to go in our data fields in CCH2. And then we're going to just kind of go through some example transcriptions. And then I can answer any questions you might have since we've been working on the portal in the end. So, here is our little agenda. And that's what we'll be covering today. All right, so to get to all of the images that you want, or all the images and the specimens that you want to transcribe, if you already have the images in the portal, then you will log in, go to My Profile, Specimen Management, Collection Management, and regardless of whether you have the specimens sitting in front of you or if you have them just as images in the portal, then you'll access the portal just the same way. You'll go into Edit Existing Occurrence Records if you're going to be using images from that are already uploaded. But if you have a bunch of specimens in front of you that have no data associated with them at all, you're going to click Add New Occurrence Records. So the majority of us are going to be imaging or transcribing based off of images, so we're going to go to Edit Existing Occurrence Records. So to find the images, at least in the Cal Poly database, that are just images and don't have any data associated with them, we're going to look for specimens that are unprocessed. And we have another step that links the accession numbers to the barcode numbers to see if there are records already in the database. And if that has already been done, and thus those specimens are ready to transcribe, and we know that there are no existing records in the database for that specimen, the other catalog number, which contains the accession numbers, is going to not be null, because we've already entered an accession number and determined that that accession number does not already exist in our database. There might be other ways that you can access your specimen data. You might just look for unprocessed images or records. And unprocessed records, that's the processing status that's going to be automatically applied to your images once they just get bulk uploaded with our image linking tool. So if this is all confusing to you, don't worry. Your institution might have a little bit different with how you're going to access these, but you can feel free to email me at any time. So this is how we would find ours at Cal Poly, and I would click Display Editor. And you can see that I have 178 images that need to be transcribed for Cal Poly. So I've already gone through and selected some good examples of tricky things that we might find in the database, so I'm going to go locate those. Okay, so here is a given specimen record, pretty standard. We have our specimen, specimen label, we have all these numbers over here. We have the barcode number, which goes in the catalog number field, and the accession number, which we are putting in the other catalog number field. So you see I just ran over here and I zoomed in really quickly without explaining it. Well, you come over to your image and you can either hold Control and click wherever you want to zoom in, or the way that I find is most intuitive is to hold Shift on your keyboard, then you hold click, and then you move your mouse up to zoom in or down to zoom out. So that way you can also use your mouse to pan around. And then once you find a place that you want to zoom, hold click, well, Shift, hold click, and then move in and out. So when your images first come up, or when you're first accessing your images, you might find that they're kind of blurry, and that could be because they're in the medium resolution mode. Sometimes it's easy to read labels even in medium resolution mode, and it's not a big deal. But if you want a clearer picture, then you'll want to click the high resolution button. All right, I'm just going to navigate to kind of an easy first example. So if I'm just coming on here to transcribe labels, I'll pull up the label so I can see all the data. I'll make sure that there aren't any annotations spread about. Sometimes they're not just above the image or above the label. But now I'll just go to this and start entering in the data. And I usually like to go from top down just so that I get the key information in. And then at the very end, I'll go through the label and see if there's any data that I forgot to enter in here. So the collector is going to be the first collector. Looks like we have Kenton Shavers and Robert J. Roden. Now this one's a little tricky. Start off with a hard one because it's hard to know to which collector this collector number belongs. I'm going to guess that it's Robert J. Roden. When all this data gets uploaded to later aggregators, all the collectors are going to be concatenated, so they're all going to be in the same field eventually. But when a collector or a user is looking for these data and they know that they're looking for the Roden specimen 8585, then this can be important. So this is a little bit tricky, but that's going to be my interpretation. So you want to enter it just as it appears on the label. Then I can hit Tab, go to the number, and again, this is the collector number, so when collectors are making collections, they have their own list of numbers that they give, usually in order, and that's what I'm going to put here. And that's always going to be on the label itself, rather than some sort of stamp or barcode number. So never put stamps or barcode numbers in the number field. Likely most of you participants know this already, but I just want to make sure to cover all our bases. In the date field, we want to put the date in a standardized format, and I'm going to put a year, full month, including leading zeros if necessary. So August is 8, so I'm going to say 0813. And if ever you need a reminder or more details about what to enter in a field, you can click this question mark here, and it will take you to the Symbiota page that will give you more information about what needs to be entered in that field. So what I could do at this point is search for duplicate records. So records that have been, or that were the same population, same place, collected by the same person on that same day, or botanical duplicates. So I'm going to search for duplicates, and it said no duplicates found. And the great thing about this duplicates function is that it looks not only in your own institution's collection, but also in other institutions' collections if they're in the same portal. So that can be really useful if you do a lot of transferring of duplicates between institutions. You don't necessarily have to copy that data again and again. So associated collectors is going to be all of the additional collectors. Here we have Kenton Chambers. And I just learned this the other day, actually. The Darwin Core suggestion is to separate these, if there are multiple associated collectors, with a, I forget what it's called, but this vertical line. We don't do that very consistently in our portal. We just use commas, but that can be a little bit confusing when you have people's names that include junior or something else separated by a comma. Pipe. Thanks, Ed. It's called a pipe, a vertical pipe. Just be consistent within your collection so that we know what to expect. Just establish a protocol and move forward with that. One thing I forgot to mention in the date field is that if you're missing any of this information, year, month, or date, or specific day, then you should enter zeros for that field. So if I just saw something that said spring of 1971, I would say 1971 0000, and so on. That's when the verbatim date field becomes or comes in handy, because then you can enter spring 1971 in here if that's what was on the label. For this, though, we have pretty clear 13 August 1971. It's not super ambiguous, but I'm going to put it in this field anyways. There are alternative ways that some date entries can be interpreted, especially if it's like a European collector, so you want to make sure to put exactly what the collector indicated in this verbatim date field, unless there's any, in case there's questions later on. Okay, now in the scientific name column, I'm going to start entering the scientific name. And you always want to select from the drop-down menu whenever possible. Once I hit Tab, it's going to automatically fill in the author and the family, so that's useful. ID qualifier is like AF or CF period. That's when the collector is not entirely sure what the identity of the specimen is. And sometimes you'll have records that will say, for example, Onanthe CF Sarmentosa. Like they know that it is Onanthe, but they don't know that it's Sarmentosa for sure. If that was the case, you would put in the ID qualifier CF Sarmentosa. If the AF or the CF is regarding the infraspecific epithet, you could say CF var minor, or whatever was iffy about that identification. If there is a determiner listed on the label, so it'll say debt by a certain person, then you would put that in this identified by column or field right here. And then if there is a date that is different than the collection date about when that was determined, you'll put that there in the date identified field. So within this box, we also have this little pencil icon, and this will give us some more options if there's more information on the label that we did not find to put in any of these other fields. So there's ID references, ID remarks, and taxon remarks. So ID remarks could be notes about what the specimen looked like, what characters the determiner used to identify that species, and then ID references could be, I use the flora of North America, I use the Jepson flora, things like that. Taxon remarks can be any notes about that species. So in this case, I'm going to put the common name. So if you do find common names on labels, you don't necessarily have to transcribe them, but it's here, so I'm going to put it in taxon remarks, because again, that is a characteristic of the taxon, not about this specific example of this taxon, this occurrence of this taxon. Okay, moving to locality, the locality box. In country, I'm going to enter United States is the standardized way to enter the USA. Then the state, say Oregon. County, looks like we have lots of county. And you don't enter county or CO or anything in addition to just that county's name. And you'll notice that I was able to select these from drop-down menus. That's always best practice to do. Municipality is not used in the United States, and so if you come upon some specimens from different countries, you may use that. Okay, now locality information is any information that would be necessary to get to that specimen or that population if you were to go relocate it. So here I have a bunch of description about the plant, growing in a marshy place. That's not super helpful for finding it, so I'm going to start right here with Ecola State Park. Ecola State Park near Seaside. Now notice I'm not going to transcribe county or state or plants of Oregon because all of that information is already captured in this country, state, and county fields. There's no latitude, longitude, or really any coordinates or elevation listed on this label, so I'm going to skip these for this specimen at least. But there is habitat data. So here we have growing in marshy place. It's kind of up to your discretion whether you put growing. I usually don't. So I just say in marshy place. Substrate would be the type of soil or some sort of soil or geologic formation. I don't see any of that information here, so I'm going to skip that. Associated taxa would be any species that are listed on the label that are associated with or in the same vicinity as this specimen. I don't see those either, so I'm going to go on. Okay, now description. This can be confused with notes often, but the description is really aspects of that particular plant. Not the species, but this individual plant. You can include information that refers to that plant and its conspecifics, such as herbaceous perennial here. So I'm entering herbaceous perennial up to 3 feet high, flowers white, and then this in marshy place is already in the habitat information. Okay, so if there were any notes about how common or infrequent or scattered, something like that, I could put that in the notes for occurrence remarks field. These next few fields right here are not generally used for our purposes. This phenology box is going to be, it's going to get a facelift soon, and we're going to be able to use that for our project. But for now, you don't have to include anything in there. You do want to pay attention to whether something is captive or cultivated. This has nothing on it that explains that it was captive or cultivated, so I'm going to ignore that, leave it unchecked. And then I have done everything that I need to. This is not a type. It doesn't say type on it anywhere. If it did, I would put the type, well, the insertion type, so isotype, holotype, paratype, I would put that information in this record. You don't need to say not a type or no, just leave a blank if it's not a type. Disposition means where that plant is, or where that specimen is in the herbarium. So if you have to file it under some other name or with in some other collection, then that would be a good place to put that information. I should also note that the notes or occurrence remarks field can also be used to put notes from the transcriber. And this is useful if the transcriber can't fill something out or has trouble filling something out. Then they will want to put their notes about that here in the notes field. And then they'll set the processing status to expert required. And then a supervisor, someone who has more time or ability to figure out the answer to the problem, will be able to look up that specimen just by looking up specimens that have the processing status of expert required. So for the CAP TCN, we are recommending that once a specimen is transcribed, then you change the processing status to pending review. And that's because there are likely to be typos or other inconsistencies between transcribers when you're first entering the data, just human error. So we're going to allow there to be a step in the future where all of the records get reviewed. You don't have to feel like your collection is unfinished if you have a bunch of specimens that are pending review. That's just how we're enabling a future data review step. So I'm going to say save edits. And there we go. All right, let's move on to something else. We'll kind of move through the next ones quicker. All right, our collector. I'm going to say our first collector is Tracy Call. Notice that I'm inferring that Call is the last name of Tracy. And Viola is the associated collector. Still no duplicates. All right, here's an example of a species that wasn't found in the taxonomic thesaurus. So I'm going to double check that I spelled that right. Orogenia. Looks like that's a genus that's recognized, but it's not a species that's recognized. So I'm going to very carefully type this out, as well as the authorship. And Symbiota gave me, or the portal gave me a little warning sign saying, hey, we didn't find this in the taxonomic thesaurus. And that's okay. It's just going to be flagged for future evaluation by our taxonomic editor or our data manager. Okay, here's an example of when we have a determiner who's different than the collector. So that would be good information to record. I'm going to say this was identified by Lincoln Constance. And it was identified by duplicate, which means that there was a different physical specimen that was taken somewhere else and identified, and then they gave that information back to the people who had this specimen, saying, hey, we found out that this other specimen from the exact same population was this species, so your specimen probably is too. So I'm going to put that in ID remarks. Okay. Now country, state, let's see, Afton is the place. And sometimes it's tricky to determine what goes in habitat and what goes in locality. When in doubt, you can put it in both fields. It's not going to break anything. Here, I think that between road and sidewalk is specific enough, so I'm just going to put in grass in habitat. And then blossom white, we're going to put that in the description. Okay, now I'm going to double check that I did everything that's on here. I have my species, I have my locality, habitat, description. Oh look, there's elevation that I didn't enter in there. Okay, so elevation goes into the locality box. You'll put it in this verbatim elevation field. And you also put the units, and then as soon as you click tab, or click this recalculate elevation in meters button, the double arrows, then it's going to convert this elevation, if it can determine whether it was in feet or meters, it's going to convert that into meters, which is how that information is reported to aggregators later on. Okay, everything else is entered in here. I will change the processing status to pending review, and then I'll click Save Edits. You can alternatively use the status auto set function if you're going to do a lot of the same type of work. So I'm going to transcribe a lot of specimens, so that every time that I'm finished transcribing a specimen, it automatically changes that specimen to pending review. This can be a little bit dangerous if you're switching between tasks and the occurrence records need different processing statuses, but right now I'm just transcribing, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Now here's an interesting example. This is a cultivated plant, so I need to make sure that I check this cultivated box down here. Something to keep your eyes out for. All right, I have F.G. Meyer, and this might be a collector number for both of these collectors together, but I'm still only going to put one collector, the first collector that I see or that is listed in the collector box. Still no duplicates. So when a duplicate is found, a new window will show up, and it will either give you a green message that says possible duplicates or exact duplicates found, or it will give you an orange message that says possible duplicate events found. So the green ones are when you can click a button that says transfer all empty fields, and that will take all the data from that potential duplicate into your form that's sitting right in front of you, and then you can evaluate it, make sure it matches the label that you're looking at, and then you can save that and say, hey, I didn't have to type through everything. If it's a duplicate event, then you can also transfer some of the data. If you think that all the locality information, the date information and such is going to be the same, often I find that it's a little bit more work to evaluate whether the locality is exactly the same as on my label. but you can kind of determine whether you're going to do that step. It's definitely useful to evaluate for duplicates because often you'll have specimens that have lots of data that you don't want to have to retype. Right, doesn't look like anyone else identified this other than F.G. Meyer and P.M. Mazzeo. Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. Interesting. This might be an instance where I would want to look up the county since it's not noted in here. So I would do some Googling, figure out where Colonial Williamsburg is, maybe even where the Alexander Purdy House is, and Gloucester Street. So this one involves a little bit of exploration. I'm not going to finish transcribing this one just for the sake of time. Let's see, Lonicera, no, it's actually the Caprifoliaceae. Okay, and before we move on to questions, I want to give you an example of entering annotation label data. So for this one, I'm going to enter the data on the original label. And when I'm entering scientific name, I notice that the latest identification is actually this annotation up here. But when I'm first entering these data, I find that it's most useful to enter exactly what's on the original label and then add the annotations afterward for a reason that I'll show you in a minute. So I'm going to say Erysimum. Capitatum. Oh, I see, Dylan. You're saying that it came up as Rubiaceae. Yeah, that is probably an issue within the taxonomic thesaurus. Thanks for looking at that, Ed. So at this point in time, the taxonomic thesaurus is under a lot of development. We're still getting it conformed to the Jepson manual. Yes, good question, Lawrence. If you see errors in the taxonomic thesaurus, definitely let me and Jason Alexander know so that we can get those changed as soon as possible. Okay, so when you enter your first label data, I'm gonna remind myself that I'm gonna come back and do this annotation label. Go to pending review, and I'm not gonna navigate away from this record yet. I see this one actually has two annotations. It has a very small pencil annotation here that says E. repandum. So I'm going to enter that annotation as well. So to enter annotations, you go into the Determination History tab. and then you start entering the new determination. As soon as I submit a determination, a new one, it will create a determination automatically with the original label data. So that's why I usually enter the original label data first, so that that next annotation that's created here is the original one. So I'm going to say, here's CMEM, fandom, and there's no information about the determiner or the date, so that's what I'm going to leave it at. Oh, I have to enter unknown, if not defined. And then ND, or no date. It's Latin, actually, but I just think of it as no date. And then I submit determination. There we go. And because I didn't note that this is the most recent annotation, it didn't yet create that original determination, so it will for the next annotation that I give it. Okay, so now I'm going to do the most recent annotation, and that's going to replace the data that's currently in the occurrence data form. Here's CMEM. Capitatum, subspecies capitatum, Robert A. Price in 1989. And this date does not need to be in the standardized format, it's just a free text form. So 1989 is just fine. And then I see that it says argillosum type, so I'm going to put that in the notes. And because this is the most recent identification of this specimen, I'm going to make sure that the current determination box is checked and submit determination. Okay, now you'll see that the original determination has been made, and then the one that I entered first, and then this is the current determination. So when I go back to the occurrence data, that information about the most recent determination is going to show up in the latest identification box. Okay, one more thing before we go to questions is how to deal with latitudes and longitude and township, range, all those crazy ways of noting locality. So if there is just a plain decimal latitude or longitude, you can put it here into the latitude or longitude box. If there's uncertainty listed there, so it might say 100 meters or something, then you'll put that in the uncertainty box. It can only be in meters, though. Just make note of that. But right here, I have latitude and longitude in degrees minutes form. Not the same thing as just degrees. So if that's the case, then I'm going to click on this F box, and that says Tools for Converting Additional Formats. And all of these other additional ways of listing this information is going to show up. So I'm going to insert these latitude, longitude values that are in degrees minutes right here. In north, longitude is west, and then I click insert, and all that information is going to be added here. The specimen also has township range, even quarters of township and range here. So when you enter township range section data, you don't put the T, you just say this is T1N R19W section S15. So I'm just putting the number, not the S. And then details, I believe this is where you put northwest 1/4. Northwest 1/4. Okay, then I'm going to insert those TRS values. On some specimens, you will only have those values instead of also having that long. In either case, you would have put all the data that's available on the label into the occurrence form somehow. This also has associated species on this label. And when you see associated species, you might consider, well, that's kind of part of the habitat. Yes, but we do have this field down here for associated taxa. So when I start entering these, you'll notice that a drop-down menu will appear. This is really handy. You can just click that, add a comma, and then start entering the next one. Veronica Americana. So you don't have to type out all your associated species. When all of this data gets exported to IDIC-Bio, associated taxa do get put into the habitat field because there is not an associated taxon field in Darwin Core, which is our metadata standard. So don't worry too much about, oh, it's not going to go into the habitat. It will in the aggregated data. All right, for the sake of time, I'm not going to finish transcribing this at the moment because I want to open the rest up for questions. So please let me know in the chat box about any questions you have about doing this, and I will continue transcribing this until you guys pipe up.
Hey, Katie, this is Ed. Can you hear me?
Hey, Ed. Yeah, you have some comments to add?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. Great presentation. Just a few small things, and excuse me if you did mention it.
Great.
One thing, there's the little zoom question mark above the image. If they click on that, they'll give instructions so people forget how to zoom in. So if the wording is confusing, let me know and I'll fix that. And then if you open it up and there's an image associated with that specimen, it should pop out automatically to the right. But the little double caret arrows that's to the right of the duplicate button, right there, that will manually toggle it back or out. So those little caret symbol will only be there if there's an image there.
Great.
And also look at the bottom right. If there's more than one images associated with that specimen, it'll say image one of two or whatever. And there'll be a tool that allows you to scroll through all the images.
Awesome.
And then for the setting the status, the processing status at the bottom, there is there's a thing that's called status auto set. And if they set that, it'll remember what you set. So if you want all of your specimens to be set to pending review, it's good to set that, and then you don't have to manually set the status. It'll just automatically do it every time you save.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the Township Range section, so with UTM, we can convert that to both UTM and also when your lat longs are in degree minute seconds. We could mathematically convert that to degree decimal, which is what's required by Darwin Core. But unfortunately, we can't do that for Township and Range because it's more complex and it involves lookup tables and so forth. I've been hoping that someone would come up with a web service that we could integrate in to do that. However, if you enter it in more or less like a standard format, there is a Geo Locate button that is located. I'll let you finish this.
No, go ahead.
It's located to the right of, yeah, right there, that symbol. And it will georeference both on right there it says 5 possible locations found in the, right there. And it will use Township and Range if it can. And in this case, that's what the first one did. And generally it does the centroid for the section. And that generally is an error of, tends to be an error of 1,000 meters, so 1 kilometer. So it won't do the sections of the section, the quarter of the section. But that's a way to easily convert township range section to a decimal latitude.
Great, good to know.
And then one more thing, if you go to associated taxa, these are little tricks that not a lot of people know. Delete Rumex Selexifolia and type RUM space SAL. Now, you don't have to type out the whole name. So there's a little just unknown little shortcut. So even if you just type R space SAL, it's going to come up with a name. So that's a shortcut. If you have a real long associated species list, you could just abbreviate and it'll start coming up stuff.
That's super
and that
handy.
Also includes the infraspecific. So you do like the first letter genus, 3 letters of the epithet, and then you start typing out the specific epithet, infraspecific epithet, and it'll start guessing on that aspect too. I'm gonna also add it where that little image box can pop out and float in the frame, so they'll make it easier. I know it's a little, when you're doing the associated taxa, it's hard to, you had to keep on scrolling up and down to see that image.
Yeah, that will be super useful.
And then there's one other thing. That I could show you guys if I could share my screen, but maybe later, as far as another way of looking up duplicates.
Okay. There you go. Let's see if you can. Perfect.
Okay. See it? All right, let me find the page. This is within SignNet. So right now I'm on a new data entry form. And I know within SignNet there is a collection, one of my collections, that was collected in 2000, May 14th. So if you enter in the collector and the date, and you start entering in the locality data, it's going to dynamically list all the collections that were made on that date by that collector. So these are all the different places I collected on that date. So if I say, as a list pops up, as I'm typing, that list is going to get smaller and smaller. But once I see something that I know is the same locality, I can select it, and it'll automatically fill in all the other fields. So it kind of works similar to the duplicate button. Now it'll only search within your collection, though. So only if that locality is within your collection. And you could deactivate that by selecting deactivate locality lookup. And now the localities, if you see a pop down, if that's deactivated, it's going to be localities that are remembered by your browser. because browsers remember localities for certain fields.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's that feature there. It could save data entry time, and I think that's all the comments I have. Oh, one last thing. This is what people ask me sometimes with the scientific name. Um, uh, so if there's a name that's not in the thesaurus, you could just enter it, like Katie said. But there's different protocols. You know, a lot of times the people that you hire, the students that you hire, they have no idea about taxonomy. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So some collection managers will tell them to type in the name however it is on the label, even if there's a mistake, even if it's minor. Depending on the skill of your data entry person, you could tell them to evaluate it, and if it seems obvious that's a mistake, select the right thing. Or you could just say, enter it in exactly how it is, and then there's a cleaning tool that's in the menus. It's in one of the data cleaning menus that allows you to look at all the names that are not indexed to the thesaurus. So you could do that every Friday or whatever. And then there's a bunch of tools there that allow you to easily clean it. So it's up to you to decide whether how much freedom you want your data entry people to make those guesses. Because sometimes scientific names are rather very similar, and it's not easy for students to really tell. So I think that's it.
Great. Yeah, you never know if a student's going to notice whether something says squarulum or
Yeah,
squarulosum.
exactly.
Yeah, so those data cleaning tools, we'll probably have a webinar about those in the future. They're super useful. I just cleaned the Cal Poly data recently, and it was really nice to just be able to batch fix a bunch of typos instead of having to go through and fix everyone. Well, as we're listening for more questions, I want to encourage you guys to fill out our survey. This is our post-webinar survey just so that we can have some documentation. If you have any suggestions, it's completely anonymous. Well, I mean, there are only 5 participants, but I'm not going to judge your responses. Just so we can help improve future webinars and see whether we're doing things well. Any other questions you might have? Thanks for those comments again, Ed. Those were super helpful. All right, I don't see anyone is typing, so we will just leave this here. And if you have any other questions, you can always put them in that webinar or in that anonymous survey. You all have my email address, but just in case you don't, there it is. You can always email me with your questions as well. And if you want a refresher on all of these, you can look at this webinar recording, and there are also all the protocols on our website. Thanks again for joining me, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.